and thank you all. I'd like to have a warm welcome from coming on stage from SCHIBSTED Media Group and from Sourcepoint of Ben BAROKAS and Rolv Erik RYSSDAL. Okay, so thank you for coming to discuss today the future and the evolution of the media industry. And I'd like to start with reminding that there was a paradigm where the content was provided by the medias to the users against either a subscription or advertising display. And it seems to be broken. It seems not to be working anymore. And we see tons of new trends like ad blocking everywhere. So I would like to have your take on this and see what's happening there. Please, Ben.
So I believe that we're entering into an era where users need to have choice in how they compensate the content consumers that they're consuming their content. And they can either choose to have advertising or choose to have subscription, but they cannot choose not to pay for the content that they consume. And so I think by entering into this period of choice, we'll be able to have a vibrant content creation ecosystem. So from a media point of view?
Well, you know, I think media content will continue to be important for consumers, both editorial content and also advertisement. And I think that if you look at Google and Facebook and what they're doing now with taking content on their sites, this is really recognition that editorial content is very important.
But when you look at monetization, there's some questions about transparency, there's some questions about the relationship between the advertiser and the users, and it seems to be also very, very into a new paradigm that is coming.
I think like the normal user doesn't understand what's happening in this shadowy, murky world of online advertising. I think over the past 10 years, there's been more and more tracking, there's been kind of abuses of data, and the normal user has said, enough already. We've been abused too much. And so the answer to that for many folks is Adblock. They don't realize that by downloading Adblock, they kill publishing and they kill content.
And if I may add something there, Ben, I think actually as publisher, we've done that damage to ourselves, because we are the one who's chosen the most aggressive formats, you know, long preloads where you cannot opt out. Whereas if you look at the Google, for instance, they've been much better with the skip function they're doing on YouTube. So we've been kind of bringing this partly upon ourselves, I think.
Yeah, I think different kinds of formats, offers around what kind of content people want to consume in terms of advertising, or allowing people to not have any advertising and subscribe. I think there's multiple new models that will be sort of introduced in this next era of publishing that will make it better for the advertiser, better for the publisher, and additionally better for the user.
So you mentioned Google a few times, and if you look, you have Google, Facebook, Apple, even Amazon there. There were startups or doing something else 10 years or 20 years ago, not even existing, and they seem to be central in the new paradigm. So what are they coming? What are they up to, and how do you deal with them? Should you compete? Should you make alliances? What's your relationship with those guys?
Well, I think it's an interesting field, and I think there's going to be incredible pace of change the next couple of years. And I think that with the launch of that Facebook is doing with their instant articles, and Apple with Apple News, and then you have Google with something called Digital News Initiative. This is a recognition that their content is important. And I think that will create opportunities for publishers because they would want to have alliances.
I think that the issue is for large publishers is they don't want to become very dependent on any of the giants. It's wonderful to have alliance, it's wonderful to have partnership, but if a large publisher is too dependent on the revenue that comes from one of those giants, they can pull that revenue at any time and put the company in jeopardy. So I think that it's important for a large publisher to be aware of that threat and then take steps in which they're not too dependent on any one of these large internet giants.
Right, but at the same time, I think it's important for publishers to be willing to experiment, but because that's what we've been far too slow at in our industry. So if you look at some of the leading news companies in Europe now, they're actually experimenting with different forms of distribution and then multiple revenue sources, because I agree with you, you cannot be dependent on only one or two.
So the main thread would be they control the end user. So what would be the investments you're going to make to have a better user experience, and at what cost, and to which level, up to which level can go there?
Well, I think for digital content creators, it's important to have the conversation with the user. What many of the old-time publishers have lacked is the conversation around monetization with their own user base. Without that, the value exchange between content creator and content consumer can become broken. And so I think as an industry, as a media ecosystem, it will be important to make sure that transaction is transparent.
Yeah, I think it's what we've been doing wrong in our industry for many years also is not to be enough user-centric. And I think we got a lot to learn. And I'm amazed when I visit Silicon Valley to see how these giants, what they're really doing is they're putting their user interest first. Try to solve simple problems. And when people are looking for news or information, that's also solving basic user needs. And we got to have that paradigm of thinking.
And I think like Spotify, for example, did a very good job of taking kind of a broken problem and an issue around monetization for music and actually aggregating it, providing revenue share, and making something that was very easy for the user to consume as much as they wanted. I think we have models like that that will be evident in the future in other places other than just music and movies.
So if you take back the example of Spotify, it would have been not considered a media 20 years ago. It would have been a technology. So you're discussing about technology, media, and media actually is melting in its own ecosystem. So what are the new ideas in terms of business model and usage? Because you have audience, now you have technology, you have a lot of things. So what else can you do? And Le Bon Coin would be a very interesting example of something very, very diversifying, but yet very profitable for media.
Yes, I think what you're seeing is that with the digital age, the value chains of all these different industries are kind of melting together. And as media company, you have to be much more tech-driven than just a few years back. But I think if you're doing that, that creates a lot of opportunities. So Le Bon Coin is having login they have millions and millions of users in France, and by having them logged in, we're able to create much better personalized streams for them, both in terms of course, the content they're looking for when buying second-hand things, but also for advertisers offering their products to them.
So it looks like local content is one idea, but then it goes back to the privacy. The more the content is local, the more it's close to me, the more I can feel overwhelmed by this. So again, what would be the balanced position?
I think the key in creating that balance is communication. So introducing a little bit of friction up front to explain to the user base what the data is being utilized for and how it's being used to help them for the long term. That it's going to provide them with additional value over time if you give up the data, and that you can be comfortable that the organization that is holding the data is doing so in a fashion that's compliant with the law. And I think these things are going to be crucial into the future.
I think privacy is a matter of trust, right? And there I think actually as local players you can have certain advantages, because if you are Le Bon Coin or another French company, people will have a closer relationship and know more about that than rather trusting all their data with Google and Facebook. So I think if you're able to do that in a responsible manner, it could actually be an advantage for local players.
And what about startups? Meaning that, is there still something to do and innovate in the ad tech industry or the media industry for startups, or is it just now a big boys game?
No, I definitely think that there's a space for amazing startups to come in and innovate around how to do content recommendation, how to provide new forms of advertising, new formats, new subscription models. I think it's actually a wonderful time now, and there's great funding opportunities. There's a lot of knowledge that's built here in France from Criteo, There is amazing companies throughout Europe, also in the retargeting space, Sociomantic, and new companies, LoopMe. There's a great ecosystem today for advertising technology.
And I think it's a great time for startups, and we are investing a lot in Stockholm, and a lot of our business is up there. And you have so many smart entrepreneurs who are creating world-famous companies, and now we have angel investors bringing them back. And I think we're seeing a little bit of the same thing here in France. So I think there's great opportunities now for startups.
So classical media now is more a global tech operation companies investing like a VC, developing technologies, etc. And a startup addressing that tech is more like a very classical high-tech company with a lot of mathematicians working there. So are we still thinking about medias? What's the next thing happening there for you?
Well, you know, I think we are, but remember what Darwin said, it's not the strongest of species who survive, but those are most adaptable to change. And I think if you translate that into organizations, if you have an organization that changes more slowly than the environment around you, then you're dead in the long run. So we got to change. But I think coming from where we're coming with, you know, strong content and classified ad knowledge, I think we have many new interesting opportunities by adding on the new tech capabilities.
And I think that's where a lot of large corporates get inspiration for innovation. They work with startups in an ongoing basis with their vendor relationships, with their deployment of new kind of technologies, of an ongoing testing methodology. These are the places where large corporates can get experience in moving quickly.
So should we expect a wave of acquisition from media companies in terms of technology and business models?
Yeah, I think you should expect them moving into this new space and experimenting, both with their own product launches, but also I think you need to acquire new skills.
So what would be the 3 hot topics you would recommend entrepreneurs to focus on?
Well, I think perhaps the first one is the most obvious, and that's just to be very, very user-centric, right?
Okay.
And try to see how can technology solve your new needs. And then what changes in the value chain are coming up as a result of the technology. I think that would be the most important.
And you see the US guys, big corporations, making acquisitions abroad, especially in Europe?
Absolutely, as well as kind of the large European companies. There was a Swedish company by the name of Video Plaza that was recently acquired by Telstra, by the large telecom conglomerate in Australia via Uyala. I see a lot of acquisitions being made by the large wireless carriers. You see just recently Verizon acquiring AOL, and then AOL acquiring Millennial. I think that there's huge opportunities for large corporates from the US, but also from Europe, buying a number of startups.
And what would be the recommendation for a founder? Should he go global very early in his startup, or should he still focus on the local market, local contents to get then acquired as a local piece of business?
I always focus on the global market. I think that the problems that are experienced by large publishers on the internet are things that happen globally.
Okay, so that was the end of this session. So thank you all for coming and discussing with us.